What if the world around us was not silent, but filled with voices we have simply forgotten how to hear? Picture an ancient forest, not as a collection of inert objects, but as a living, breathing community of beings, each tree a keeper of stories, each leaf a page in a book of wisdom written long before our time. This was not a fantasy for our ancestors, it was their reality. Across the old world, from the sun-drenched groves of Greece to the misty woodlands of the Celtic Isles, people lived with a profound conviction that trees were conscious, sentient entities, wise elders who spoke through the wind, divine messengers who bridged the realms of gods and mortals, and silent guardians who held the secrets of the cosmos within their rings. This deep-rooted belief in arboreal consciousness shaped myths, guided civilizations, and wove humanity into the very fabric of the natural world in ways we are only beginning to remember. In this video, we are embarking on a journey to uncover those forgotten voices, to walk through the sacred groves where oracular oaks whispered prophecies, to stand beneath the immense branches of Yggdrasil, the Norse world tree that connected all realms of existence, and to decipher the Ogham alphabet of the Celts, where every letter was a tree and every tree a teacher. We will explore how these myths were not mere stories but reflected a worldview where humans saw themselves as part of a living, speaking universe, a universe where deforestation was a spiritual transgression, where rituals were held to honor tree spirits, and where the rustling of leaves could change the course of history. These narratives reveal a time when harmony with nature was not an abstract ideal but a daily practice, rooted in respect, reverence, and a recognition that the forest itself had something to say. Why does this matter to us today, in an age of concrete and screens? Because these ancient beliefs hold a mirror to our own relationship with the natural world, a relationship that has become distant, transactional, and often destructive. By rediscovering these myths, we are not just exploring the past, we are reclaiming a part of ourselves that still yearns to belong to something greater, to listen to the wisdom of the earth, and to remember that we are not separate from nature but deeply intertwined with it. This journey is an invitation to re-enchant our world, to see the trees around us not as resources to be used but as companions in the great story of life. So join us as we decode the language of the forests, and perhaps by the end, you will find yourself listening a little more closely to the whispers carried on the wind. Deep within the rugged mountains of Epirus, far from the bustling agora of Athens, stood one of the most ancient and revered sanctuaries in all of Greece, the Oracle of Dodona. Here, the air itself seemed thick with mystery, humming with the sound of the wind moving through the leaves of a sacred grove of oak trees. But these were no ordinary oaks. The Greeks believed that Zeus himself spoke through them. Pilgrims would travel for weeks, risking difficult journeys, to stand before these trees and seek counsel from the god of the sky. Their questions were not trivial. They were matters of state, of war, of love, and of destiny. They would present their queries to a group of priestesses known as the Peleiades, or the Doves, who would then listen intently to the complex language of the grove. The prophecy did not come from a cryptic human utterance, as at Delphi, but from the natural world itself, the specific rustle of the leaves, the cooing of the doves that nested in the branches, and even the melodic clanging of bronze vessels hung from the boughs, all stirred by the same divine wind, the breath of Zeus. This was a direct line to the divine, and the medium was the conscious, living tree. This practice reveals a profound and fundamental aspect of the ancient Greek worldview. They did not see a sharp division between the spiritual and the natural realms. Instead, the entire cosmos was a single, interconnected, and animate whole. A tree was not merely a plant, it was a vessel, a conduit for divine will and wisdom. Its very existence was a form of participation in the cosmic order. This belief elevated the natural world from a backdrop for human drama to an active character within it. To cut down such a tree was not just logging, it was an act of sacrilege, a silencing of a divine voice. This reverence extended beyond the famous oracles. Throughout the Greek world, specific groves or alsos were dedicated to various deities. These were temples without roofs, where the trees themselves formed the sacred architecture. An entire legal and cultural framework existed to protect these spaces, with severe penalties for anyone who dared to harm even a single branch. The influence of this arboreal consciousness seeped into the very foundations of Greek thought, shaping its philosophy and mythology. The great philosopher Aristotle himself wrote about the unique daemon or spirit that inhabited living things, a concept that finds its roots in the belief that trees and forests possessed their own intelligence and purpose. In myths, dryads and hamadryads were nymphs whose lives were inextricably tied to specific trees. If the tree died, so did the nymph. This wasn't just a charming story. It was a powerful metaphor for the symbiotic relationship between life forces, a narrative expression of the deep ecological understanding that the fate of humanity and the fate of the forest are woven together. The sacred groves of Greece stand as a powerful testament to a time when humanity listened to the world around it, believing that wisdom could be found not only in the words of sages but in the whispering leaves of an ancient oak, if only one learned how to hear. From the sacred groves of Greece, we travel now to the harsh, majestic world of the Norse, where the entire cosmos was held together not by stone or steel, but by the living, breathing form of an ash tree. If the Greek oaks were divine messengers, then Yggdrasil was the universe itself, a conscious, suffering, and infinitely generous entity that connected all things. Imagine a tree so vast that its highest branches scrape the heavens of Asgard, home of the gods, while one of its three great roots stretches down into the icy mist of Niflheim, the world of the dead. Another root finds its way to Jotunheim, the land of the giants, and a third to Midgard, our own human world. This was not a passive structure, it was the central nervous system of all existence, a living axis around which the 9 realms turned. This world tree was far more than just a cosmic map. The Norse saw it as a sentient being, acutely aware of the struggles and triumphs of every creature within its embrace. It was a tree that felt pain. At its roots, the monstrous dragon Nidhogg gnawed relentlessly, a constant, corrosive presence symbolizing decay and the inevitable destruction that threatens all of creation. High above in its branches, an eagle perched, watching over the realms, while a squirrel named Ratatoska ran tirelessly up and down the trunk, carrying insults between the eagle and the dragon, a vivid personification of the gossip and strife that fuels conflict throughout the world. And yet, despite this constant suffering, Yggdrasil provided. From its branches fell dew that was honey, nourishing the bees, and its very presence offered sustenance and structure to gods and mortals alike. Tending to this immense, suffering tree were the Norns, 3 powerful figures named Urd, Verdandi, and Skuld. They were not simply caretakers, they were the weavers of fate itself. Residing by the well of Urd at the base of Yggdrasil, they drew water from the well and mixed it with rich clay to pour over the tree's roots, preventing its bark from rotting and withering. In this powerful image, we see the profound Norse understanding of interdependence. Even fate itself is engaged in a reciprocal relationship with the tree of life. The Norns nourish Yggdrasil, and in return, the tree supports the very fabric of destiny upon which their workings depend. It is a perfect metaphor for a world where nothing exists in isolation. The health of the cosmos is directly tied to the health of the tree, and both require conscious, constant care. This belief in an interconnected, animate universe where a tree is the most vital participant is a staggering leap of the imagination. For the Norse, Yggdrasil was the ultimate expression of arboreal consciousness. It was not just a thing that was alive, it was aware. It held all knowledge, witnessed all events, and connected the divine to the mortal, the living to the dead. To stand before a great ash tree in a Viking Age forest was to see a tiny reflection of the cosmic Yggdrasil, a reminder that every part of nature, from the smallest leaf to the greatest world pillar, is a thread in the same vast, living tapestry. This wasn't mere mythology, it was a guiding principle that shaped their respect for the natural world, understanding that the balance of life itself depended on the well-being of this conscious cosmic tree. While the Greeks and Norse envisioned trees as divine messengers and cosmic pillars, the Celts took this connection a step further, weaving arboreal consciousness directly into the very structure of their language and thought. They developed a unique script known as Ogham, an alphabet where every single character or feather is named for a different tree or shrub. This was far more than a simple naming convention. It was a profound philosophical system. The letter B, for instance, was Beeth, the birch tree, symbolizing purification, new beginnings, and the potential of a clean slate. D was Jor, the mighty oak, representing strength, steadfastness, and a door to inner wisdom. To write a word in Ogham was to invoke the essence of these trees, to tap into their symbolic power and embed the vitality of the forest into every message, every law, and every story recorded. This deep reverence extended beyond the symbolic into the spiritual and physical landscape of the Celtic world. Certain trees were believed to be thin places, powerful conduits between our world and the other world, a realm of deities, ancestors, and potent magic. The hawthorn, often found growing alone in a field or beside a sacred well, was considered a guardian of the threshold. Its twisted branches and fragrant spring blossoms were signs of fairy presence, and to harm one was to risk dire supernatural retribution. Even more potent was the yew tree, its evergreen foliage and incredible longevity, often spanning thousands of years, making it a powerful symbol of eternity and rebirth. Celtic chieftains were often buried under yews, their souls guided by the tree's spirit into the afterlife. These weren't just superstitions, they were a form of ecological spirituality that dictated daily life, influencing where people built their homes, how they managed the land, and the immense respect they showed towards the arboreal elders in their midst. This world, yew naturally gave rise to myths where forests were not passive settings but active, sentient participants. Tales abound of entire woods that could rearrange themselves to mislead those with ill intent or to protect those in need. Heroes on quests might encounter a talking tree that offered crucial advice or a cryptic warning, its voice the creaking of ancient boughs in the wind. In the Ulster cycle of Irish mythology, the great hero Cú Chulainn receives his spear from a warrior who emerges from a stand of alder trees, further blurring the line between human and arboreal life. These stories served a crucial purpose. They encoded a practical and moral code for living in a symbiotic relationship with nature. They taught that the forest was a conscious community to be engaged with, not a resource to be dominated. The legacy of Celtic tree lore is a stunning example of how a culture can fully integrate the natural world into its identity. The Ogham alphabet was a mnemonic device, a calendar for seasonal rituals, and a spiritual map all at once. A Celt walking through a forest didn't just see timber, they saw a living library, a council of elders, and a physical connection to the divine. Each tree with its unique characteristics, the silver bark of the birch, the sturdy trunk of the oak, the protective thorns of the hawthorn, offered a lesson in resilience, patience, or protection. This system reflects a holistic understanding that human wisdom is not separate from nature's wisdom, but is in fact an extension of it. The forest was their university, and the trees were their professors, whispering lessons on how to live, how to die, and how to belong to the world. Long before the oracles of Greece or the world tree of the Norse, one of humanity's very first epic poems was already giving voice to the forests. In the ancient Mesopotamian tale of Gilgamesh, our hero, the powerful but arrogant king of Uruk, embarks on a quest for eternal fame. His plan is to travel to a distant, mythical land and achieve a feat no mortal has ever accomplished. He will journey to the magnificent cedar forest, slay its divine guardian, the demon Humbaba, and harvest its legendary trees. For Gilgamesh, this is a conquest, a way to cement his legacy by subduing a wild and sacred place. But the epic itself presents a far more complex and startling view. As Gilgamesh and his companion Enkidu approach the forest, they are met with a sight that fills them with awe and terror. This is no ordinary woodland. The cedars rise to impossible heights, their fragrant branches forming a canopy that blocks out the sun, and the very air hums with a powerful, palpable presence. This forest is alive in a way that defies modern comprehension. It is not merely inhabited by a guardian. The trees themselves are sentient. The text describes the moment of their entry with profound reverence and dread. The cedars watch them. They are aware of the interloper's intentions. Most strikingly, when Gilgamesh raises his axe to strike the first tree, the epic suggests the forest itself cries out. It is a protest, a lamentation against the violence about to be inflicted. The trees are not silent victims. They are vocal, conscious entities expressing their anguish. This is a breathtaking concept from a text that is over 4,000 years old. It reveals a worldview where the natural world was not an inert resource, but a community of beings with their own rights, voices, and spiritual essence. To harm them was not just an act of logging, it was an act of violation against beings considered divine. The cedars of Lebanon were believed to be the physical manifestations of gods, or at the very least, their abodes. Their wood was so sacred it was reserved for the most holy of purposes, constructing temples and palaces for the gods themselves. Using this timber was not just about its quality, it was about harnessing the sacred voice of the forest, embedding the very consciousness of the cedar into the heart of human worship. The guardian of this forest, Humbaba, is often simplified as a monstrous demon, but his role is deeply ambiguous. He is not merely a mindless beast. He is appointed by the god Enlil specifically to protect the cedar forest from exactly the kind of arrogant defilement that Gilgamesh represents. In this light, Humbaba is less a villain and more an ecological custodian, a divine ranger enforcing a celestial protection order. When Gilgamesh and Enkidu finally succeed in killing Humbaba and begin their wholesale slaughter of the trees, the epic does not frame it as an unambiguous victory. Instead, it is a moment of profound transgression. The felling of each cedar is treated as a moral catastrophe. Enkidu, who was born wild and understood the language of the wilderness, feels the weight of this sin most acutely, and his later death is interpreted as a direct consequence, a divine retribution for their violation of the sacred grove. This ancient narrative presents us with a powerful and urgent metaphor. The Epic of Gilgamesh is, among many things, one of the earliest recorded stories about deforestation, and it frames that act not as an economic necessity but as a spiritual hubris, a severing of the sacred bond between humanity and nature. Gilgamesh's journey begins with the desire to conquer nature to make a name for himself, and it ends with the devastating understanding that in doing so, he has lost something fundamental. The talking trees of Mesopotamia challenge us to look at our own relationship with the natural world and ask a difficult question. Have we, in our pursuit of progress, become like Gilgamesh, so focused on what we can take that we have forgotten how to listen to the voices that protest in the wind? But perhaps no site in the ancient world so perfectly encapsulates this belief in arboreal consciousness as the Oracle of Dodona, a place where the divine did not speak through a human priestess, but through the very voice of the forest itself. Nestled in a remote valley in northwestern Greece, Dodona was considered the oldest Hellenic oracle, a place of such ancient power that it was said to have been established by Zeus himself. Unlike the more famous oracle at Delphi, where a priestess inhaled vapors from a fissure in the earth to deliver her prophecies, the god of the sky at Dodona communicated through a far more organic and mysterious medium, the rustling leaves of a sacred oak tree. Pilgrims from humble farmers to powerful kings would undertake the arduous journey to this secluded sanctuary, their hearts filled with questions about the future. Should they go to war, marry a certain person, embark on a long voyage? They came not to hear the words of a person, but to listen to the wisdom of a tree. The process of divination was a symphony of natural and man-made sounds, all interpreted as the language of the divine. At the heart of the sanctuary stood the sacred oak, or grove of oaks, its every whisper and sigh believed to be the direct speech of Zeus. The wind, or pneuma, that moved through its branches was not seen as a random weather pattern but as the literal breath of the god, animating the leaves into speech. Priestesses known as the Peleiades, which translates to doves, served as the translators of this arboreal language. Their name itself harkens back to the foundation myth of the oracle, which tells of a black dove that flew from the Egyptian city of Thebes, landed on an oak at Dodona, and commanded that a sanctuary to Zeus be established there. These priestesses would stand in quiet reverence, listening to the complex patterns of rustling, the intensity of the sound, and the direction of the wind to decipher its meaning. Adding to this natural orchestra were bronze vessels known as lebetes, which were hung from the branches of the trees. When the wind blew, these vessels would chime and clang together, creating a haunting, melodic percussion that intertwined with the rustling leaves. The priestesses would interpret the entire soundscape, the susurrus of the leaves, the clanging of the bronze, and even the calls of the doves that nested in the tree, as a single, coherent message from the heavens. This method of prophecy reveals an incredibly sophisticated and intimate relationship with the natural world. The Greeks of Dodona did not believe the priestesses were inventing the prophecies. They were simply interpreting a message that was already present, being broadcast through the conscious, participating oak tree. The tree was not a symbol, it was an active instrument, a living antenna perfectly attuned to the frequency of the divine. This elevates the concept of arboreal consciousness from a general belief to a practical, functional reality that guided some of the most important decisions in the ancient world. Historical accounts tell us that the Athenian general Themistocles was said to have consulted the oracle before the Battle of Salamis, and even the hero Odysseus was instructed by Zeus at Dodona to return to Ithaca disguised as a beggar. The sheer trust placed in this system, the willingness of entire city-states to base their fate on the sound of wind in leaves, shows a profound cultural acceptance that intelligence and wisdom were not exclusively human traits, but were woven into the very fabric of nature. The legacy of Dodona is a powerful testament to a different way of being in the world. It stands as a monument to a time when humanity sought answers not by looking down at screens or inwards at their own intellect, but outwards by listening intently to the environment around them. It represents a form of spirituality that was deeply ecological, recognizing that the divine communicates through the living, breathing world. In an age where we are often disconnected from nature, the whispering oaks of Dodona challenge us to reconsider our place in the world. They ask us a simple yet profound question. If we quiet our minds and truly listen, could the natural world still have something to tell us? The belief wasn't that the gods were in the trees, but that the trees, as conscious beings, were partners in a cosmic dialogue, and at Dodona, for centuries, humanity leaned in close to hear what they had to say. Venturing now into the deep, primeval woodlands of Eastern Europe, we enter a world where the forest is not a place you simply walk through, but a living, breathing entity you must negotiate with. Slavic folklore presents a vision of nature that is profoundly animate, where every thicket and clearing possesses its own spirit, its own consciousness, and its own mood. At the heart of this belief system stands the Leshy, perhaps one of the most fascinating and complex forest guardians in all of world mythology. This was no mere monster lurking in the shadows. The Leshy was the master and the soul of the forest itself. He was a shapeshifter, often appearing as a towering man made of wood and moss, with grass for hair and roots for feet, but he could just as easily shrink to the size of a blade of grass or grow as tall as the highest pine. His eyes might glow like embers, and his voice could mimic the sound of the wind, a wolf's howl, or even the voice of a loved one to lead the unwary deep into the trackless woods. The Leshy's primary role was that of a protector, a stern custodian of the wild and all its creatures. He wasn't inherently evil, but he was fiercely territorial and held humans to a strict code of conduct. If you entered his domain with respect, perhaps to gather mushrooms or berries, and you asked for his permission, he might guide you to the best patches or even protect you from harm. But if you entered with arrogance, with an intent to poach game or chop down trees without offering a prayer, his retribution was swift and terrifying. This is where the mythology becomes so vivid. The Leshy didn't just hide behind trees, he commanded them. He could cause the entire forest to shift and rearrange itself. Paths would vanish behind a traveler, familiar landmarks would suddenly be in the wrong place, and the trees themselves were said to step aside for him and close ranks against his enemies. He could make the trees groan and creak in warning, or even speak in low, rumbling voices to deliver a chilling message to those who would listen. This wasn't a metaphor for the Slavic people. This was a literal description of a conscious, responsive ecosystem. Beyond the powerful Leshy, the reverence for individual trees was deeply embedded in daily practice. The birch tree, with its striking white bark, was particularly sacred. Seen as a pure, feminine force, it was associated with light, protection, and renewal. It was common practice to hang ribbons on birch branches as offerings, to lean against its trunk to absorb its strength, or to gently tap on it to share news with the ancestors, whose whispers were thought to travel on the wind through its leaves. In contrast, the oak was a masculine symbol of perpetual strength and cosmic endurance, a tree so powerful it was believed to be lightning-proof because it was the favorite of the thunder god Perun. To harm such a tree was to invite calamity upon your entire household, as its spirit would withdraw its protection and perhaps even seek vengeance. This intricate web of belief created a cultural ethos of profound reciprocity. Humans were not the owners of the land, they were guests in a realm that belonged to older, more powerful beings. The forest was a conscious neighbor, one you had to live alongside with a careful mixture of respect, caution, and gratitude. Folktales were not just entertainment. They were the vehicle for this essential ecological wisdom. Stories of hunters who got lost for days after disrespecting a tree, or of villages that prospered because they left offerings of bread and salt at the edge of the woods for the Leshy, served as practical lessons for sustainable coexistence. This worldview fostered a relationship with nature that was both fearful and deeply symbiotic. You feared the forest's wrath, but you also relied on its generosity for food, shelter, and medicine. You understood that your survival depended on recognizing that the trees were watching, listening, and had a voice of their own. In the whispering groves of Slavic lore, the boundary between the human and the natural world dissolves completely, reminding us that we are but temporary visitors in an ancient, sentient community that was here long before us and will remain long after. While the myths of Greece and the Slavic lands spoke of trees as divine messengers and territorial guardians, a different kind of arboreal consciousness emerges from the plains of northern India. one not of prophecy or peril, but of profound, peaceful partnership. The story begins with a prince, Siddhartha Gautama, who, after years of extreme asceticism, sat down with a new resolve beneath the wide, welcoming branches of a sacred fig tree known as the Bodhi tree. He vowed not to rise until he had unlocked the ultimate truth of existence. For 49 days he meditated, grappling with inner demons and worldly temptations personified by the Mara, the tempter. And throughout this immense internal struggle, the tree was his sole constant companion. In Buddhist tradition, this was no passive backdrop. The tree is revered as the Bodhimanda, the seat of awakening, but it was far more than a seat. It was a conscious, compassionate witness and an active participant in this pivotal moment for humanity. It is believed the tree itself willed its branches to spread wider, offering a canopy of shade and a palpable aura of serenity, protecting the meditator and creating a sacred space conducive to enlightenment. When Siddhartha finally attained liberation, becoming the Buddha, the awakened one, the tree had shared in that victory. It had not merely been present, it had offered its own energy and stability, a silent yet potent form of support. This foundational event established a deep and enduring theme within Buddhism, that nature is not separate from the spiritual path, but is an essential ally within it. Trees are repeatedly depicted in the Jataka tales, stories of the Buddha's previous lives as benevolent beings. In one past life, he is even born as a magnificent tree spirit who uses his wisdom to settle disputes and offer guidance to travelers. These narratives paint a picture of the natural world as intrinsically wise and compassionate, a teacher in its own right. The gentle rustle of leaves in the wind becomes a lesson in impermanence, the deep, unwavering roots a model for steadfastness in meditation, and the tree's provision of shade and fruit a living example of selfless giving. This view fosters a relationship of gratitude and reverence, where the environment is seen as a collective of conscious beings, each with its own role to play in the grand interconnected web of life, or pratityasamutpada. The most powerful testament to this belief is the living lineage of the original Bodhi tree itself. After the Buddha's passing, his foremost disciple, Ananda, is said to have wept not for his teacher, but for all future followers who would never have the chance to learn directly from him. The Buddha compassionately replied that they could instead venerate the tree under which he attained enlightenment, for it would be a living teacher and a tangible connection to his experience. A sapling from that original tree was famously brought to Sri Lanka in the 3rd century BCE by the nun Sanghamitra, daughter of the Emperor Ashoka. Planted at Anuradhapura, that very tree still stands today, over 2,000 years later, making it the oldest historically authenticated tree in the world with a known planting date. For millions of Buddhists, this is not simply a historical relic. It is a direct descendant, a living embodiment of the Buddha's enlightenment, and it is treated with the utmost devotion. Pilgrims from all over the world visit to meditate in its presence, hang prayer flags from its branches, and offer heartfelt prayers, believing the tree retains a conscious connection to that moment of awakening and can still emanate peace and wisdom to those who sit beneath its leaves. This practice elevates the concept of arboreal consciousness from a mythological idea to a continuous, lived reality. The tree is a mentor, a silent sage that teaches without words. Its very existence, its resilience through storms, its seasonal cycles of growth and loss, its quiet, enduring presence offers a constant, nonverbal sermon on the core principles of Buddhism: patience, equanimity, interdependence, and the potential for growth toward the light. It stands as a permanent reminder that enlightenment is not an abstract concept locked away in ancient texts, but a natural state that is always available, intimately connected to the world around us. The Bodhi tree invites us to shift our perspective entirely, to see that our spiritual quest does not require us to escape the world, but to sit quietly within it, to learn from the patient wisdom of a tree, and to recognize that nature itself is our most profound and patient partner on the path to understanding. Leaving behind the serene enlightenment of the Bodhi tree, we journey now into a world of vibrant color, divine play, and cosmic melody. Hindu mythology presents a vision of nature that is not just conscious but celebratory, where the very forests are alive with music and dance. In the great epic, the Ramayana, as the exiled Prince Rama, his wife Sita, and his brother Lakshmana traverse the dense Dandoka forest, they do not walk through a silent wilderness. They are greeted by a breathtaking spectacle. The trees themselves are singing. Their leaves rustle in complex harmonic rhythms. Their branches sway in graceful, coordinated movements, and the very air resonates with their joyful melodies. This is not a passive, whispered wisdom, but an active, emotional participation in the world. The trees express a full spectrum of feeling. They sing songs of welcome to the virtuous. They hum lullabies of protection around ashrams, and they can also moan with sorrow or creak out stark warnings when danger or impurity approaches. This enchanting concept is deeply rooted in the Hindu philosophical principle that consciousness, or chit, permeates the entire universe. A tree is not an inert object. It is a vessel for this universal consciousness, and in the realm of myth, that consciousness is given a voice. Often, these vocal trees have a specific backstory. They are frequently depicted as sages or celestial beings, like Apsaras or Gandharvas, who were cursed to spend a period of time in the form of a tree. This transformation is not a punishment that silences them, but rather a metamorphosis that changes the medium through which they express themselves. A being that once sang with a human voice now sings with the wind through leaves, its wisdom and identity intact but its form completely altered. This serves as a powerful narrative device that blurs the lines between human, divine, and plant life, suggesting that spirit can inhabit any form and that the natural world is teeming with hidden intelligences waiting to be recognized by those with the right awareness. This belief translated into everyday reverence for specific tree species, each embodying divine attributes. The immense banyan tree, with its countless aerial roots that grow into new trunks, is seen as a symbol of eternal life and expansion, a physical manifestation of the universe itself. It is often called Kalpavriksha, the wish-fulfilling tree of mythology. The Ashoka tree, whose name literally means without sorrow, is associated with love and protection. It is famously described in the Ramayana as the tree under which Sita was held captive in Lanka, and it is said to have whispered words of comfort to her in her distress. To care for these trees was not horticulture, it was a form of devotion. People would water them, decorate their trunks with sacred threads and dyes, and circumambulate them in meditation, truly believing that their actions were nurturing a conscious entity that could, in return, bestow blessings and guidance. This rich anthropomorphism was far more than a charming story element. It was a sophisticated vehicle for moral and ecological instruction. Tales of arrogant kings or hunters who ignored the warnings of a speaking tree and met with misfortune served as clear parables about the consequences of disrespecting nature. They taught that the environment is not a slave to human will but a responsive partner in a reciprocal relationship. If you approach the forest with humility and respect, it will offer its gifts and its protection. If you approach with greed and violence, it will reveal its formidable power. This world view positioned trees as active, emotional participants in the grand cosmic drama, or Leela, of the gods. They weren't just setting the stage, they were members of the cast, reacting to the actions of heroes and villains, weeping for tragedies and rejoicing in victories. In the singing forests of Hindu lore, the entire cosmos is presented as one interconnected, conscious, and melodious whole, inviting us to open our ears and our hearts to the symphony of life that has been playing all around us since the beginning of time. Far from the grand cosmic stages of Yggdrasil or the exotic enchanted forests of India, the belief in arboreal consciousness was woven into the very fabric of daily life for ordinary people across Europe. This was a practical, hands-on spirituality centered on the trees that grew right outside one's door. Among the most revered was the rowan tree, often called the mountain ash. With its vibrant red berries that seemed to hold captured sunlight against the gloom of winter, the rowan was universally regarded as a powerful talisman against evil. It was believed that a spirit resided within its trunk, a conscious guardian that would actively work to protect the household. Planting a rowan near your cottage wasn't just landscaping, it was an act of inviting a sentinel onto your property. The specific sounds the tree made, the distinct creak of its branches in the wind, the groan of its trunk on a cold night were not random noises, they were its language. A sudden, sharp crack might be a warning of approaching ill weather or a stranger with malicious intent, while a gentle, rhythmic rustling could be interpreted as a lullaby of blessing and safety for the home and its inhabitants. Equally potent was the elder tree, a plant shrouded in a mix of deep reverence and cautious fear. It was said that a spirit known as the Elder Mother, or Hildemoa in Scandinavian lore, resided within. She was the guardian of the tree's consciousness, and to take any part of the elder whether for its medicinal berries, its flowers for cordials, or its wood for a child's cradle required a direct and respectful request. One did not simply cut from an elder. You would approach the tree, explain your need, and ask the Elder Mother for permission. If you took without asking, the consequences were severe. Folktales tell of children who fell terribly ill after cradles were made from its wood, or of farmers whose livestock sickened after using elder branches for fencing. The tree's consciousness was not passive, it was reactive, and it would exact revenge for disrespect. This practice ingrained a powerful ethic of reciprocity. The tree offered its gifts generously, but it demanded acknowledgement in return. It was a relationship built on mutual respect, where humans were not masters but supplicants and partners. This belief system gave rise to a rich tapestry of folktales that served as the primary vehicle for this ecological wisdom. In countless stories, a hero lost in a storm is guided to safety by the groaning of an ancient oak, its limbs pointing the way to shelter. A young mother, worried for her sick child, might hear the whisper of a birch tree outside her window, offering comfort and promising the dawn. Conversely, a greedy landowner who decides to clear a sacred grove to plant more crops might find his own health failing, his family struck by misfortune until he makes amends. These narratives were not mere fantasy, they were essential cultural code. They taught each new generation that the landscape was alive and aware, that every action in the natural world had a reaction, and that the community's well-being was directly tied to the health and happiness of the trees that watched over them. This created a profound and practical symbiosis. The well-being of the tree and the well-being of the family were seen as one and the same. If the tree flourished, so did the household. If it was damaged or ailing, misfortune would surely follow. This was a form of everyday animism that required no priests or temples. The divine was present in the yard, at the edge of the field, in the local wood. It fostered a deep, ingrained conservation ethic long before the word ecology was ever coined. You protected the trees not because of an abstract environmental policy, but because your family's safety and prosperity depended on it. These guardian trees of Europe were the ultimate expression of a world where humanity saw itself as part of a living community, a network of relationships that included the human, the natural, and the spiritual, all communicating, all interdependent, and all deserving of a voice. While the Greeks listened to the whispering oaks of Dodona, their eventual successors, the Romans, cultivated their own profound relationship with prophetic trees, weaving a complex tapestry of belief that they inherited and refined from the mysterious Etruscans. This was not a simple borrowing of ideas, it was a deep cultural fusion. The Etruscans, the sophisticated civilization that dominated central Italy before the rise of Rome, held a rich tradition of divination known as the Disciplina Etrusca. For them, the entire universe was a text written by the gods, and one of the most vital chapters was written in the language of the natural world. They believed that divine will could be read in the flight patterns of birds, the shape of a lightning bolt, and most importantly for our story, in the movement and sounds of trees within sacred groves. When the Romans absorbed the Etruscan cities into their growing republic, they didn't just conquer their land, they adopted and adapted their spiritual technology, seeing immense value in these ancient practices for understanding the will of the gods. The Romans formalized this reverence into a central part of their state religion. They established sacred groves known as lucus, which were meticulously designated tracts of forest dedicated to specific deities. These were not wild, untamed places, they were carefully managed spiritual precincts. A lucus dedicated to Jupiter, the king of the gods, for instance, was a place of immense power and solemnity. Entering one was like stepping into a living temple. The air was thick with silence and anticipation, broken only by the natural sounds of the forest, the creak of ancient boughs, the rustle of leaves in the wind, the call of a bird. Roman priests, known as augurs or specific flamines for certain gods, were trained to interpret this symphony. They didn't hear random noise, they heard a code. The direction of the wind, the intensity of a rustle in a particular tree, even the way sunlight dappled through the leaves, all of it could be a sign, an omen, to be decoded and presented to the Senate or a general about to lead his legions into battle. The very fate of the empire could hinge on the message carried on the breeze through a sacred grove. Perhaps no tree was more intimately associated with Roman prophecy than the laurel. This was the sacred tree of Apollo, the god of prophecy, light, and reason. The connection was so potent that the leaves of the laurel became the ultimate symbol of divine victory and purified wisdom. Before a critical battle or an important state decision, Roman priests would perform rituals involving laurel branches. They might scatter the leaves on the ground and observe how they landed, or listen to the sound they made when shaken. Most famously, the Sibyl of Cumae, the prophetic priestess who guided Aeneas to the underworld and whose books of prophecy were consulted in times of great crisis for Rome, was said to write her oracles on laurel leaves. The image is powerful, the wisdom of the god of prophecy himself, channeled through the conscious medium of his sacred tree, its leaves becoming the physical parchment for divine communication. This practice elevated the laurel from a simple plant to an active participant in the governance and spiritual life of the most powerful empire the world had yet seen. What's truly remarkable is how this deeply rooted belief in arboreal consciousness became a unifying force across the vast and diverse Roman Empire. From the rainy highlands of Britannia to the arid deserts of Syria, the Roman practice of establishing sacred groves was replicated. Local tree spirits and deities were often syncretized with Roman gods, creating a shared spiritual language that stretched for thousands of miles. A soldier from Gaul serving on the Danube frontier would understand the significance of the sacred oak grove he passed, just as a merchant from Egypt would recognize the power of the laurel trees surrounding a temple to Apollo. This wasn't just religious dogma imposed from Rome. It was a widespread cultural acceptance of a fundamental idea that trees possessed a higher awareness and could serve as the most reliable mediators between the frantic, mortal world of humans and the eternal, orderly realm of the gods. The empire was bound by laws, roads, and legions, but it was also subtly connected by this shared reverence for the whispering wisdom of the forests, a silent, leafy network that reminded every citizen, from emperor to slave, that they were part of a natural world brimming with divine meaning. But if the sacred groves of Rome represented a formalized state religion seeking order from the arboreal whispers, the enchanted forests of Arthurian legend plunge us into a world of pure mystical chaos and personal trial. Here, the wilderness is not a temple to be interpreted by priests, but a shape-shifting labyrinth designed by magic to test the very soul of a knight. The most famous of these is the Forest of Broceliande, a mythical woodland in Brittany that serves as the backdrop for some of the most transformative episodes in the Arthurian canon. This is no mere collection of trees, it is a conscious, willful entity with its own inscrutable motives. A knight does not simply ride through Broceliande, he negotiates with it, and his success depends not on his strength alone, but on his purity of heart, his courage, and his respect for the unseen rules of this green domain. The paths themselves are deceptive, twisting and vanishing to lead the arrogant astray, while perhaps opening directly for the humble. The trees are active participants in this game. Oaks might groan to signal danger, willows might weep to show the way to a sacred spring, and thorny thickets might part like curtains to reveal a hidden glade only to snap shut behind the traveler, sealing him in. This sentient landscape is the ultimate crucible for the chivalric ideals of the Round Table. The forest actively judges those who enter. Sir Gawain, in his myriad adventures, often finds himself at the mercy of these woody sentinels. In one tale, a talking tree might deliver a cryptic riddle he must solve to proceed. In another, an entire avenue of trees might bow their branches to form an archway, honoring a virtuous quest. Conversely, a knight known for cruelty or falsehood might find the woods turning against him, vines tripping his horse, low-hanging branches striking his helmet, and a pervasive fog of confusion eroding his sense of direction until he is utterly lost, both physically and spiritually. The forest is thus a moral compass made manifest in nature, a conscious force that rewards courage and punishes hubris, teaching lessons that the court of Camelot, for all its glory, often failed to impart. No character embodies this fusion of the human and the arboreal more perfectly than the enigmatic Green Knight from the famous 14th century romance, Sir Gawain and the Green Knight. He is a terrifying and magnificent figure, a giant of a man with emerald skin, wearing green armor and riding a green horse who carries a colossal green axe. He is the spirit of the natural world, specifically the untamed, regenerative, and sometimes frightening force of vegetation itself, walking into the civilized court of Camelot as a living challenge. His most shocking feature is his immortality. When Sir Gawain beheads him in the famous Christmas game, the Green Knight simply picks up his own head, which proceeds to speak, reminding Gawain of his promise to meet him in a year and a day at the Green Chapel to receive the return blow. This figure, who is later revealed to be the lord of a castle nestled deep within a wild forest, is the ultimate representation of arboreal consciousness. He is a tree given human form. He can be struck down, but he cannot be killed, for the life force of nature always returns, always regenerates. His challenge to Gawain is not merely a test of bravery, but a lesson in humility and respect for the ancient, cyclical power of the natural world that exists entirely outside the realm of human kingdoms and their fleeting codes of honor. The Arthurian legends, therefore, offer a uniquely medieval Christian perspective that is still deeply infused with much older, pagan ideas about the spirit of the land. The sentient forest is a liminal space, a threshold between the known world and the magical otherworld. It is where knights go to be stripped of their royal titles and worldly identities, to face their deepest fears alone, and to be reborn through their ordeal. The wisdom they gain is not found in a book or from a sage, but is whispered to them by the wind in the leaves or shown to them in the pattern of sunlight on the forest floor. These stories reflect a worldview where mystery had not yet been banished from the world, where the landscape itself was alive with purpose and agency. They encourage us to see forests not as resources or recreational spaces, but as ancient realms of transformation, where the only way to find your way is to listen, to respect, and to understand that you are a guest in a kingdom far older and wiser than your own. Amidst the quiet churchyards and rolling green hills of the English countryside stand some of the most ancient living beings in all of Europe, the yew trees. These are not mere ornaments in a graveyard. They are timeless sentinels, their gnarled, rust-colored trunks often hollowed out by centuries, yet their evergreen needles perpetually renewed. In the local folklore of countless villages, these specific trees were believed to be far more than ancient plants. They were the guardians of memory, the keepers of secrets, and for those who knew how to listen, they were whispering oracles. The common practice was to visit the churchyard yew not just to mourn the dead, but to seek counsel from a being that had witnessed the entire history of the community. Every birth, every marriage, every funeral, every secret joy and sorrow for 1,000 years or more. It was said that if you pressed your ear against its rough, ancient bark in the absolute quiet of twilight, you might hear its voice, not a human voice, but a low hum, a soft creak, or a sigh in the wind that moved through its branches, a sound that could resolve into a prophecy or a piece of long-forgotten wisdom. This belief was deeply rooted in the yew's incredible biological reality. Many of these trees are indeed thousands of years old, predating the very churches they stand beside. Their remarkable resilience, their ability to resist disease, to hollow out and continue living, to drop a branch that then takes root and begins a new life, made them the perfect symbol of eternal consciousness and rebirth. They were seen as literal bridges between worlds, their roots intertwining with the bones of the ancestors buried below, and their branches reaching up toward the heavens. This physical spanning of the earthly and the spiritual realms made them natural conduits for communication. The secrets they held were not trivial gossip. They were the accumulated knowledge of generations, the understanding of cycles of life and death that no single human could ever possess. A young person unsure of their path might seek the yew's counsel on a choice of partner or profession, trusting that the tree had seen enough such dilemmas to offer guidance through a feeling, a sign, or an intuitive knowing that arose in its presence. The folklore surrounding these trees fostered a powerful sense of continuity. The village yew was a constant, a living landmark that connected the present community to all those that had come before. It was a tangible reminder that the people of the past were not truly gone. Their stories were simply waiting in the tree's memory to be heard by a receptive ear. This instilled a profound respect for the tree's wisdom and a protective instinct towards its well-being. To harm a churchyard yew was considered an act of profound desecration, not just against the church, but against the collective memory and the very soul of the place itself. These narratives encouraged a form of deep listening, a quiet attentiveness to the natural world that is largely lost today. They challenge our modern, fast-paced sensibilities to slow down, to be still, and to consider that the most ancient beings among us might still have something to say, if only we can remember how to hear them. From the mystical forests of Arthurian legend, we now journey into the world of Persian mysticism, where the whispering of leaves transforms into the most exquisite poetry, and every tree becomes a profound teacher of the soul. In the works of revered Sufi poets like Rumi and Attar of Nishapur, the natural world is not a mere backdrop for human drama, but a vibrant, articulate participant in the divine conversation. These masters of verse did not simply describe trees, they listened to them, and in their poetry, the trees speak back with unparalleled wisdom, lamenting human folly, rejoicing in divine love, and offering gentle guidance on the path to enlightenment. A forest in a Rumi poem is a congregation of sages, each leaf a verse from the sacred text of the universe, each rustling branch a line of cosmic poetry waiting to be deciphered by a heart attuned to its frequency. This was far more than a charming literary device. It was the direct expression of a core Sufi principle known as Wadat al-Wujud, or the unity of being. This philosophy posits that all of creation is a manifestation of the divine essence, a single, conscious reality expressing itself in infinite forms. From this perspective, a stone, a river, a human, and a tree are not separate, inert objects but are all infused with the same underlying consciousness, all singing the same song of existence in their own unique way. The Sufi poet's role was to act as a translator for this universal choir, to give voice to the silent longing of the cypress for the sun, to articulate the joyful surrender of the rose as it blooms and scatters its petals. When Rumi writes of a tree rejoicing, it is not a metaphor in the modern sense. It is a report on the state of a conscious being, a description of its ecstatic participation in the divine dance of life. No tree captured the Sufi imagination quite like the cypress, with its tall, slender form reaching straight toward the heavens, its evergreen nature symbolizing eternal life, and its graceful movement in the wind that resembles a dancer in a state of spiritual ecstasy. The cypress became the ultimate symbol of the upright, seeking soul. Persian poets saw in its unwavering posture a model of faithfulness and devotion, a being that stands in patient meditation, forever turned toward its beloved, which is the divine source. They often referred to it as Sarv-e-Azad, the free cypress, seeing in its independence from fruit and its simple, elegant existence a state of spiritual liberation from worldly desires. Its voice was not heard in words but in its very presence, the silent, powerful truth it communicated through its resilience, its beauty, and its steadfast growth. To sit beneath a cypress was to be in the company of a silent mystic, a guide who taught through being, not through speaking. The imagery crafted by these poets serves as a powerful invitation, a call to perceive the entire world as a mirror reflecting our own inner journey. A tree growing from a seed, struggling toward the light, weathering storms, and eventually flourishing is a perfect allegory for the soul's own struggles and triumphs. When Attar, in his masterpiece The Conference of the Birds, describes the birds passing through the 7 valleys of quest on their way to find the Simurgh, the king of birds, the landscape itself is alive with instruction. The trees they pass are fellow travelers, their leaves offering shade and their roots revealing the hidden water of spiritual knowledge. This personification was a masterful teaching tool, making complex mystical concepts accessible and deeply relatable. It taught that spiritual wisdom was not locked away in remote monasteries, but was blooming in every garden and whispering in every grove, available to anyone who would learn to see with the eyes of the heart. This profound literary tradition gives us a transformative way of engaging with the natural world. It asks us to move beyond seeing a tree as an object and to instead recognize it as a subject, a thou rather than an it, a conscious entity with its own experience and its own song to sing. The divine breath, or Nafas al-Rahman, that animates the universe flows through the oak and the rose with the same sacred force that flows through us. The talking trees of Persian poetry are not a fantasy. They are a reminder of a fundamental truth we have forgotten in our noise and haste, that nature is the primary scripture, the first and most constant revelation of the divine, and if we quiet our minds and open our hearts, we might just hear the cypress tree, even now, offering its timeless lesson in how to stand tall, reach for the light, and dance with the wind. Moving north from the sacred groves of Rome, we find ourselves in the deep, dark forests of ancient Germania, where the belief in arboreal consciousness took on a raw, powerful, and formidable character. For the various Germanic tribes, from the Saxons to the Franks to the Goths, the wilderness was not a place to be tamed or interpreted through a priestly class, but a direct and overwhelming manifestation of divine power. Theirs was a world where the gods did not dwell in distant heavens, but were immanent, present in the very fabric of the natural world, and most potently within the ancient, towering trees. They held specific groves as the most sacred of spaces, holy sanctuaries where the boundary between the human and the divine became so thin it was almost non-existent. Entering one of these groves was to step into the presence of the gods themselves. The air was thick with a palpable sense of awe and terror, a feeling the Romans called religio, the root of our word religion, meaning a feeling of awe and dread in the face of the sacred. Within these hallowed spaces, every sound and movement was a potential message from the other side. The most revered of the Germanic gods, such as Dodona, known to the Norse as Thor, were believed to inhabit or speak through specific trees. Dodona, the god of thunder, strength, and protection, was intimately associated with the mighty oak, a tree known for its resilience and for being a frequent target of lightning strikes. To stand beneath a great oak during a thunderstorm was not to risk a random act of nature. It was to witness Dodona himself, riding through the skies in his chariot, his mighty hammer Mjolnir striking the tree and charging it with his immense power. The subsequent rustling of the oak's leaves in the wind, the groaning of its massive branches, were not mere noises. They were the god's voice, interpreted by tribal chieftains or seers during rituals to guide the people in matters of war, justice, and community well-being. This practice required no elaborate temple. The tree itself was the altar, the shrine, and the oracle. This world view found its ultimate expression in the veneration of the Irminsul, a sacred pillar-like tree that stood as the central religious symbol for the Saxon people. The name itself is telling. Its exact meaning is debated, but it is often interpreted as Great Pillar or All-Sustaining Pillar. This was not merely a symbol. It was believed to be the very axis of the world, a conscious, living entity that physically and spiritually connected the earth to the cosmos and held up the order of creation. It was the Saxon counterpart to the Norse Yggdrasil, a tangible, central point around which their entire spiritual universe revolved. The Irminsul was the heart of their identity, the focal point for major gatherings, offerings, and ceremonies. To be in its presence was to be at the center of the world, in direct communion with the forces that sustained all life. Its consciousness was not that of a single spirit, but a cosmic awareness, a conduit for the will of the gods and the wisdom of the universe. This profound reverence came with a powerful and strict taboo. To damage or desecrate one of these sacred trees, and especially the Irminsul, was not simply vandalism. It was an act of cosmic treason, a direct assault on the deities themselves that would inevitably call down catastrophic divine retribution upon the entire tribe. This belief enforced a powerful conservation ethic, protecting these ancient beings for generations. The most famous and tragic example of this clash of worldviews occurred in the late 8th century when the Frankish Christian king, Charlemagne, as part of his bloody campaign to subjugate and convert the Saxons, made it a specific military objective to locate and destroy the Irminsul. For Charlemagne, this was a calculated act of psychological and spiritual warfare. He understood that to break the Saxon people, he had to break their connection to the divine, and that meant cutting down their world pillar. His forces eventually found and demolished the Great Pillar, an act the Saxons would have viewed as an apocalyptic event, a literal unmaking of their world order. This historical moment starkly illustrates the immense gulf between a worldview that saw trees as conscious, divine partners and one that saw them as pagan idols to be eradicated. The legacy of the Germanic communicative groves is a testament to a spirituality that was direct, experiential, and deeply ecological. It underscores a universal human instinct to find the sacred in the awe-inspiring majesty of nature, to look at an ancient tree and see not just wood, but a wise old being, a pillar of the world, a home of the gods, and a voice that, if we are quiet and respectful enough, might just share its secrets with us. While our journey has focused primarily on the myths of Europe and Asia, It is crucial to recognize that this deep, intuitive sense of arboreal consciousness is not confined to what we traditionally call the Old World. Across the vast and diverse continent of Africa, a rich tapestry of oral traditions presents a strikingly parallel vision, where trees are not passive features of the landscape but active, responsive members of the community. In countless stories passed down through generations, certain trees are revered as ancient sages, their gnarled forms and whispering leaves holding the collective wisdom of the people and the voices of those who came before. This is not a peripheral belief but a central pillar of cultural understanding, demonstrating that the human inclination to hear the world speak through trees is a truly universal archetype, a shared heritage that connects us all. Perhaps no tree embodies this concept more powerfully than the mighty Baobab, with its colossal, bottle-shaped trunk that seems to store centuries of rainwater and its branches that look like roots reaching for the sky. The Baobab is a landmark of both the physical and spiritual landscape. In many West African traditions, these trees are considered the first beings created by the gods, planted upside down as a mistake or as a mark of their unique nature. But their significance goes far beyond their striking appearance. A baobab standing at the center of a village is far more than a source of shade or fruit. It is the community's elder, its council chamber, and its living library. It is beneath its generous boughs that important meetings are held, disputes are settled, and stories are told to wide-eyed children. The belief is that the tree itself is listening, absorbing the knowledge and the history of the people, and in return offering its silent, steadfast guidance. The specific sounds it makes, the deep groan of its trunk expanding in the heat, the rustle of its leaves in the dry Harmattan wind, are not random. They are interpreted as the tree's language, a response to the events of the village, a warning of coming hardship, or a sigh of contentment when the community is at peace. This belief system creates a profound and practical symbiosis between the people and the tree. The health of the baobab is directly tied to the well-being of the village. A thriving, lush tree signifies a prosperous and harmonious community, while a sickly or withering baobab is seen as a dire omen, a sign that something is deeply wrong, perhaps a social conflict left unresolved or a spiritual connection that has been neglected. This is a powerful form of lived ecology, where environmental and social health are understood to be one and the same. The tree becomes a barometer for the soul of the community, its physical state reflecting their moral and spiritual condition. This encourages a relationship of mutual care and profound respect. You protect and honor the tree because your own survival and happiness are literally reflected in its leaves. This concept extends beyond the baobab to many other species across the continent. In some traditions, the mighty Iroko tree is believed to house a powerful spirit that can bring either great fortune or terrible misfortune, and offerings are made to it before its wood is used for carving. The she tree is often personified as a maternal figure, providing nourishing fruit and healing butter for her children, the people. What makes these African narratives so compelling is their seamless integration into daily life. This isn't a mythology reserved for priests or special rituals. It is a functional worldview that guides everyday decisions. A hunter might pause to listen to the creak of a specific tree before choosing a path, interpreting it as advice from an ancestor. A mother might whisper her hopes for her child to a young sapling, planting its future alongside his. These practices reveal a world that is thoroughly enchanted, where the boundary between the human and the natural is fluid and permeable, and where wisdom is not just found in the words of people, but in the responsive, living presence of the trees that have witnessed it all. But the Greek belief in trees as conscious partners was not confined to the sacred groves of oracles. It found a powerful and heartbreaking voice on the stage, in the very heart of their cultural expression, tragedy. In the hands of playwrights like Euripides, the natural world was not a silent witness to human folly and suffering, but an active, grieving participant. In his play Hippolytus, we see this concept pushed to its most poetic and devastating extreme. The play tells the story of a young man, Hippolytus, devoted to the chaste goddess Artemis, who becomes the tragic victim of his stepmother Phaedra's forbidden desire and his father Theseus's rash curse. As Hippolytus lies dying, dragged to his death by his own panicked horses after a sea monster terrifies them, the chorus does not call upon other people to mourn. Instead, they call upon the natural world, and specifically, they summon the trees. The chorus begs the mountain nymphs to go to the dying youth, but then makes a stunning request. They ask the very trees of the mountain to join in the lament. They plead, "Let a branching pine tree drip its grief in resinous tears for the boy." This is not a simple metaphor. In the logic of Greek tragedy, this is a literal invocation. The pine tree is being called upon to consciously participate in the communal act of mourning, to express its profound sorrow through its own physical essence, its sap, which becomes tears. The tree is personified not as a decoration, but as a sentient being capable of feeling empathy and expressing grief in a way that mirrors human emotion. Its sighs are the wind through its needles, its tears are the sap that oozes from its bark. The boundary between human and plant, between feeling and flora, completely dissolves in this moment of extreme pathos. The forest itself becomes a chorus of mourners, its voice a symphony of creaking boughs and rustling leaves that underscores the human tragedy unfolding before it. This device served a profound purpose beyond mere poetic beauty. By giving the trees a voice and an emotional response, the playwrights were reinforcing a fundamental tenet of the ancient Greek worldview, that humanity is not separate from nature, but embedded within it, and that the cosmos is a single, interconnected entity. Human actions, especially those of transgression and suffering, send ripples through this entire system. The trees lament because they are connected to Hippolytus's fate. They have witnessed his pure devotion to Artemis, the goddess of the wild, and they feel the injustice of his downfall as a wound to the natural order itself. They are the sympathetic witnesses to the drama, the silent council of elders who have seen it all, and who express what cannot be expressed by the human characters alone, the pure, unadulterated grief of the world itself at the loss of innocence. This was far more than a fanciful anthropomorphism. It was a sophisticated literary expression of what we might now call ecological empathy. It asked the audience to expand their circle of compassion beyond the human characters on the stage and to consider the perspective of the environment that surrounded them. In a culture that believed spirits or daemons inhabited every stream, rock, and tree, this was a logical extension of a lived reality. The stage became a microcosm of the world, and the lamenting trees were a reminder that our stories are never ours alone. They are witnessed and felt by the very land we inhabit. This challenges us as a modern audience to reconsider our own relationship with the natural world. It asks us to move beyond seeing nature as a passive resource or a scenic backdrop, and to instead perceive it as a responsive, feeling presence. In the sighing of the pines for Hippolytus, we find an ancient invitation to listen to the world around us with more attentive ears, to recognize that the forest has always been a part of our stories, and that it, too, feels the weight of our tragedies. Crossing now from the mournful pines of Greek tragedy, we find a different, more ethereal form of tree consciousness in the misty landscapes of ancient China, where the willow tree stands as a graceful and poignant bridge between the worlds of the living and the dead. Unlike the mighty, thunder-associated oaks of Europe, the willow embodies a different kind of power, one of flexibility, sorrow, and gentle, receptive wisdom. With its long, slender branches that weep gracefully towards the earth and its leaves that shiver and shimmer at the slightest breath of wind, the willow naturally lends itself to tales of spirit communication. In Chinese mythology and folklore, this elegant tree was never considered merely a plant. It was a conscious, sensitive entity deeply attuned to the subtle energies of the unseen world. Its very form a symbol of the connection between the solid ground of the living and the shadowy depths of the spirit realm. This association made the willow a central figure during the Qingming festival, the annual day for tending graves and honoring ancestors. It was a common practice for people to wear twigs of willow or to place fresh branches on the grave sites of their loved ones. This was not a mere symbolic gesture, it was a functional act of spiritual communication. The willow was believed to be a conduit, a living antenna that could transmit the prayers and memories of the living down into the underworld, and just as importantly, it could carry back messages and blessings from the ancestors. The gentle, sighing sound of the wind moving through its trailing branches was interpreted as the very voices of the departed, whispering secrets, offering comfort, or sometimes delivering solemn warnings to those who had the patience and the heart to listen. A sudden, intense rustling might be a spirit trying to get one's attention, while a soft, rhythmic swaying could be a sign of ancestral approval and peace. This belief in the willow's conscious receptivity led to a beautiful and tangible practice, the hanging of prayer slips. People would inscribe their hopes, their fears, and their questions onto small pieces of paper or cloth and carefully tie them to the pliant branches of a venerable willow tree. The act was one of active faith, a faith that the tree was not an inert object, but a conscious intermediary that would absorb these human appeals, understand their emotional weight, and then, through its deep roots and high branches, deliver them to the appropriate celestial or underworld authorities. The tree became a living prayer wheel, its leaves and branches constantly in motion, working on behalf of those who sought its help. This practice illustrates a profound holistic worldview, where humanity, nature, and the spirit world are not separate kingdoms but a single, interconnected system in constant dialogue, with the willow serving as a trusted and gentle translator. The willow's role extended beyond ancestral communication into the realm of protective magic. Because of its intimate connection to the spirit world, it was also believed to have the power to ward off malevolent ghosts and negative influences. Taoist priests would often use willow branches to sprinkle sacred water during exorcism rituals, believing the tree's own conscious spirit would lend its power to cleanse a space of harmful energies. Folk tales tell of travelers who, caught out after dark in a place known for restless spirits, would shelter under a willow tree, trusting in its guardianship to keep them safe until dawn. This dual role, both a bridge for benevolent spirits and a shield against malign ones, highlights the complex and respected position the willow held. It was a tree that could navigate both the light and the dark aspects of the spiritual spectrum, its consciousness acting as a filter and a guide. This deep cultural integration shows us a society that saw its spiritual life as inextricably woven into the natural environment. The whispering willow was not an object of superstition but a partner in the human journey, a participant in the community's emotional and spiritual well-being. Its presence in poetry, art, and daily ritual underscores a universal human desire to feel connected to something larger than ourselves, and to believe that the world around us is listening, responding, and caring. In the gentle sway of a willow branch, ancient Chinese culture found a voice for the voiceless, a comfort for the grieving, and a powerful reminder that we are never truly alone, but are always part of a vast, conscious, and whispering world. Moving east from the Germanic groves along the shores of the Baltic Sea, we find a spiritual tradition where the sacredness of trees was not just a belief but the very core of daily life. For the ancient Baltic peoples, the Lithuanians, Latvians, and Old Prussians, the world was a living, breathing communion of spirits, and the most powerful of these spirits resided in the grand, untouched groves of oak and linden trees. These were not simply pretty places for a picnic. They were the open-air cathedrals of the pre-Christian world, the direct and unmediated dwelling places of the gods. Entering one of these groves was to step into a sanctified space where every leaf, every acorn, and every creak of a branch was charged with divine meaning. The air itself was thick with presence, a feeling that the veil between the human realm and the divine was at its very thinnest right here, beneath this canopy of ancient, watching trees. At the center of this spiritual universe stood the thunder god Perkunas, a deity of immense power, justice, and vital force, not unlike the Norse Thor or the Slavic Perun. His sacred tree was the mighty oak, a being whose towering strength and resilience in the face of storms made it his natural earthly embodiment. When lightning struck an oak, an event that must have been both terrifying and awe-inspiring, it was not seen as a random act of nature. It was Perkunas himself descending to earth, infusing the tree with his raw, celestial energy and consecrating it as his own. The resulting scar on the trunk, or the unique pattern of split branches, was then studied by the Krivis, the high priests of the Baltic faith, as a direct omen, a divine message to be decoded for the entire community. But the communication did not end with lightning strikes. The daily language of the gods was far more subtle, found in the constant, whispering dialogue of the forest. The Krivis and other seers would spend hours in quiet contemplation within these groves, listening. They interpreted the specific rustle of oak leaves in the wind, whether it was a frantic, clattering sound or a gentle, sighing murmur, to predict the outcomes of coming battles or the success of a harvest. They observed the way sunlight dappled through the linden trees, another deeply sacred tree associated with harmony and love, often dedicated to the goddess Lema, the weaver of fate. The direction a heavy branch would fall, the pattern of birds nesting in a specific bough, even the health of the tree's foliage, all of it was a text to be read, a broadcast from the conscious, participating world tree that held the collective wisdom of the earth. This profound belief was protected by one of the most powerful and strictly enforced taboos in Baltic society. To harm a sacred tree, to break so much as a single branch without making the proper offerings and prayers, was not a minor offense. It was a catastrophic transgression, an act of sacrilege that was believed to call down the immediate and furious wrath of Perkunas himself. The consequences were not vague or spiritualized. They were expected to be direct and tangible. A farmer who disrespectfully chopped wood from a sacred grove might find his fields struck by blight. A warrior who damaged a holy oak could expect misfortune in his next battle. This was a worldview that enforced its own ecological ethics through powerful spiritual deterrence. It ensured the preservation of these ancient groves for centuries, not out of an abstract concept of conservation, but out of a genuine, deeply held fear and reverence for the conscious beings that lived within them. The forest was a respected elder, a divine guardian, and a temperamental power all at once, and to live in its shadow was to understand that human survival depended on its favor. This tradition fostered an incredibly strong, community-based relationship with the natural world. Important decisions were not made solely in the chieftain's hall, they were brought to the grove. Disputes between families might be settled under the limbs of a revered linden, its presence believed to encourage fairness and peaceful resolution. Prayers for healthy children, abundant crops, and protection from illness were whispered directly to the trees, believed to be carried by their roots deep into the earth and by their branches high up to the heavens. The sacred grove was the heart of the village spiritual and social life, the place where the community collectively engaged with the forces that governed their world. This showcases how arboreal consciousness was not a peripheral folklore for the Baltic peoples. It was the absolute central pillar of their entire pre-Christian spirituality. Their gods were not distant figures in the sky. They were present, audible, and visible in the living, breathing, and speaking forest that surrounded them, a constant reminder that divinity was rooted in the very soil beneath their feet. As the classical world gave way to the Middle Ages, the ancient whispers of the forests did not fall silent. Instead, they found a new and surprising home within the illuminated pages of Christian manuscripts. Medieval bestiaries, those fascinating encyclopedias of beasts and wonders, were far more than simple catalogues of animals. They were moral guidebooks designed to explain the natural world as a vast and complex symbol of divine will. And within these texts, the forest itself was presented as one of the most enigmatic and sentient creatures of all. These were not the safe, managed woodlands of a lord's estate, but the deep, untamed wilds that bordered the known world, places of profound mystery and danger, where the very trees were described as possessing a strange and often frightening consciousness. A traveler might stumble into a grove where the trees could speak, offering cryptic advice or dire warnings with creaking voices. Other accounts told of woods that could physically move, their trunks shifting to block a path or open a new one, actively guiding or misleading those who entered. Some legends even spoke of trees with grasping, animate branches that could capture the unwary, holding them fast as a lesson or a punishment. This was not presented as pagan superstition, but as a recognized, if wondrous, fact of God's creation. What makes this so remarkable is the seamless blending of older, animistic beliefs with a new Christian framework. The medieval mind saw no contradiction in this. The ancient pagan understanding of the forest as a living, conscious entity was absorbed and repurposed to serve a Christian moral universe. A talking tree was no longer necessarily the dwelling of a local spirit. It could be an angel in disguise, a demonic trap, or a direct instrument of God's will, placed there to test a traveler's faith, humility, or virtue. The forest became a physical manifestation of the spiritual journey, a place of trial and temptation, not unlike the desert wilderness faced by Christ. The moving paths and speaking boughs served as divine signs, challenging the hero to choose between pride and humility, cruelty and compassion, faith and despair. In this way, the deeply rooted belief in arboreal sentience was not erased by Christianity. It was baptized, its core essence preserved, but its meaning redirected toward a new theological purpose. The forest remained alive and aware, but its consciousness was now understood as a part of God's elaborate plan, a character in a cosmic drama written by the divine. This widespread acceptance of such ideas in formerly Christian texts demonstrates just how tenacious the concept of arboreal consciousness truly was. It persisted not on the fringes of society, but in its very heart, copied by monks and read by nobility. These stories served as crucial cautionary tales for a society that was still deeply dependent on and vulnerable to the forces of nature. They taught a practical form of respect: to enter the forest arrogantly, to chop wood without prayer, or to ignore the subtle signs and sounds of the trees was to invite disaster. This was an ecological ethic wrapped in a religious parable. By personifying the forest, these myths made the consequences of disrespect immediately understandable and deeply personal. They codified the idea that the natural world was not a dead resource for humanity to exploit, but a responsive participant in a moral order, one that would react to human behavior with either bounty or retribution. Ultimately, the enchanted forests of the medieval bestiaries represent a vital bridge in our story. They connect the raw, primal animism of the ancient pagan world with the more structured symbolic order of the later Middle Ages and the Renaissance that would follow. These narratives ensured that the old ways of seeing the understanding of nature as a living, speaking presence were not lost, but were instead woven into the fabric of European storytelling. They kept the idea alive, ready to be rediscovered and reimagined by poets and artists in centuries to come. The forest in these manuscripts is a powerful reminder that even in an age of faith, the human imagination still heard the rustle of leaves as language and saw in the ancient, gnarled trunks not just wood but wisdom. While the medieval mind saw the forest as a moral testing ground, a different kind of seeker was also looking to the trees, not for divine judgment, but for the secrets of the universe itself. In the hidden world of alchemy, the quest was for the philosopher's stone, the legendary substance that could transmute base metals into gold and grant eternal life. But this was never merely a physical pursuit. It was a profound spiritual and psychological journey, a process of inner transformation where the alchemist sought to refine their own soul from the lead of ignorance into the gold of enlightenment. And in this grand, symbolic operation, the natural world was the primary textbook, and trees were among its most eloquent and conscious teachers. Alchemists did not see a division between matter and spirit. For them, the entire cosmos was alive, intelligent, and constantly communicating its secrets to those who knew how to observe and interpret. A tree was not a chemical factory but a spiritual entity, its very growth from a seed into a towering organism a perfect mirror of the alchemical process itself, a movement from potential to actuality, from darkness to light, from the earthly to the celestial. The mighty oak, revered across countless cultures, held a place of supreme importance in the alchemical tradition. Its incredible durability, its vast lifespan, and its ability to withstand powerful storms made it a living symbol of the perfected and immutable state the alchemist sought to achieve, the ultimate stability of the philosopher's stone itself. But it was the humble acorn that offered the most potent key to the mystery. Here was a small, unassuming object, easily overlooked, that contained within its hard shell the entire potential, the complete blueprint for a future giant. For the alchemist, this was a direct parallel to the prima materia, the primitive, chaotic base matter that was the starting point of the great work. It looked like nothing special, but within it slept the secret of kings. The acorn was a perfect example of how the greatest truths were often hidden in plain sight, encased in a form that the uninitiated would dismiss as worthless. The act of an acorn germinating, breaking open its shell, and sending a root down into the earth while a shoot reaches for the sky, was a dynamic model of the alchemical process of separation and conjunction, of solving and coagulating, where the spiritual and the material are divided and then reunited in a more perfect conscious whole. This worldview transformed the alchemist's relationship with the natural world into an active, participatory dialogue. They didn't just cut down trees for their furnaces, they sat with them, meditated on their forms, and studied the patterns of their bark, the shape of their leaves, and the properties of their fruits, believing these were all intentional signs, a language written by the divine mind. Some alchemical texts even suggest that the trees themselves could communicate, not with human words, but through a kind of sympathetic resonance or through signs that a purified and receptive mind could understand. A sudden drop of resin, the specific way a leaf fell, or the pattern of light through a canopy could be a message pertaining to the alchemist's current stage of work. This required a radical shift in perception, from seeing nature as a dead resource to be used to seeing it as a community of conscious beings, each with its own wisdom to impart. The forest became a university, and the trees were the senior professors, silent but infinitely wise. This esoteric tradition invites a powerful reinterpretation of the quest for knowledge. It suggests that enlightenment is not about inventing something new, but about decoding what is already present all around us. The secrets of transformation and immortality were not locked away in a complex chemical formula, but were blooming on every branch and encoded in every seed. The alchemist's laboratory, with its flasks and furnaces, was merely a miniature, controlled model of the vast, living laboratory of nature. By studying how a tree draws nourishment from the earth and transforms it into wood, leaf, and fruit using the energy of the sun, the alchemist sought to understand the greater cosmic process of spiritual nourishment and transformation. The tree, in its patient, silent growth, became the ultimate teacher of the virtues required for the great work: patience, resilience, grounding, and an unwavering aspiration toward the light. This perspective does not just belong to the past, it offers a timeless invitation to see the world as a living book, full of meaning, and to approach a walk in the woods not as a simple recreation, but as a conversation with some of the oldest and wisest teachers on earth. Emerging from the shadowy forests of medieval manuscripts, the belief in arboreal consciousness stepped boldly into the light of the Renaissance, finding vibrant and unsettling new life on the canvases of Northern European masters. While the era is often celebrated for its humanistic turn and scientific curiosity, a parallel, older current of thought continued to flow powerfully through its art, a persistent vision of nature not as a passive backdrop, but as a living, feeling, and often morally charged participant in the human drama. Artists like Hieronymus Bosch and Pieter Bruegel the Elder did not merely paint landscapes, they painted ecosystems of the soul, where every plant, animal, and rock was imbued with consciousness and intention, and where trees, in particular, became some of the most expressive characters on the stage. Consider the unforgettable and bizarre world of Bosch's The Garden of Earthly Delights. This is not a realistic depiction of a forest, but a psychedelic anatomy of sin and desire, and the trees within it are active agents in the narrative. They are hybrid creatures, part plant and part animal, sometimes part mineral and part human. Some trees grow from the bodies of prone figures, their branches fruiting with strange berries that the painted denizens of the panel eagerly consume. Others are topped with monstrous, owl-like heads, watching the chaotic revelry with silent, judgmental eyes. In one section, a pair of ears holds a giant knife poised between two tree-like legs. Here, the tree is not a symbol of life but of a nature perverted by base instinct. Its animated form is a direct reflection of the inner state of humanity, confused, hybridized, and lost in sensory pursuit. Bosch uses these grotesque, sentient trees to externalize a spiritual and psychological condition, proving that the belief in a conscious natural world could be harnessed to explore the deepest and darkest corners of the human psyche. Pieter Bruegel the Elder, working a generation later, offered a slightly more grounded but no less potent vision. In his masterpiece The Triumph of Death, a nightmarish panorama of destruction, the trees are as dead and barren as the skeletons overrunning the earth. Their leafless, twisted branches are like claws scratching at a bleak sky, their forms echoing the agony and finality of the scene. They are not neutral objects. Their very shape expresses the emotion of the painting: despair, ruin, and the ultimate triumph of entropy. Conversely, in his lush seasonal paintings like The Hunters in the Snow, the trees, though more naturalistic, still possess a kind of silent awareness. The tall, snow-laden pines stand as quiet, weary witnesses to the hard winter and the struggle of the hunters returning home. They frame the scene, their dark green boughs heavy with the weather, contributing to the mood of solemn tranquility and resilient endurance. Bruegel's genius lay in his ability to make the entire landscape, every branch, every shadow, every figure, feel connected in a single, unified emotional experience. The trees are integral to that chorus. This artistic movement was a fascinating fusion of lingering medieval symbolism and the burgeoning Renaissance interest in the observable natural world. Artists were beginning to study trees from life, capturing the specific texture of bark and the unique way light filters through leaves with unprecedented accuracy. Yet they chose to infuse this realistic detail with a layer of ancient meaning. A gnarled old oak wasn't just a well-painted oak, it was a symbol of steadfastness, its knots and hollows suggesting the wrinkles and wisdom of an ancient elder. A slender, bending willow wasn't just a willow, it was a figure of grace and melancholy, this visual language was immediately understandable to the contemporary viewer. It reinforced a cultural understanding that the world was a living book, filled with signs and meanings placed there by God, and that trees were some of its most eloquent pages. By translating the myths of talking trees and conscious forests into a powerful visual format, these Renaissance artists ensured the idea's survival. They embedded it deep within the Western cultural imagination, creating an indelible link between the natural world and the world of emotion, spirit, and moral consequence. Their work stands as a testament to a time when the boundary between humanity and nature was far more porous, and a walk in the woods could feel like a walk through a crowd of silent, watching, and deeply knowing beings. Leaving behind the complex symbolism of alchemy, we find perhaps the most enduring and accessible home for the myth of the talking tree, the world of fairy tales. Collected and refined by figures like the Brothers Grimm, these stories were not mere children's entertainment. They were the vessels for ancient folk wisdom, carrying the deep-seated belief in arboreal consciousness straight into the nursery and the hearth. Within these familiar narratives, the forest is once again a place of transformation and trial, and the trees that stand within it are far from passive. They are conscious, judgmental, and active participants in the human drama, serving as pivotal helpers or formidable obstacles based on a character's virtue, humility, and respect. Consider the profound example hidden within the story of Cinderella. In the Grimm brothers' version, far before a fairy godmother appears, it is a tree that serves as the agent of divine grace. After her mother's death, Cinderella plants a hazel twig on her grave, watering it with her tears. This act of tender, living memorial causes the twig to grow into a magnificent tree, a direct manifestation of her grief and love. This is no ordinary plant, it is a conscious, responsive entity. When Cinderella goes to the tree and voices her sorrows, a white bird appears in its branches, often interpreted as the spirit of her mother or the soul of the tree itself, and throws down to her the exquisite dresses and slippers she needs to attend the royal ball. The tree does not act on its own whim. It responds to Cinderella's purity of heart and her act of nurturing. It is a perfect illustration of the principle of reciprocity that underpins so many of these ancient myths. Treat nature with respect and care, and it will actively work in your favor. The tree is not a tool to be used, but a partner to be honored. This pattern repeats across countless tales. In the story of the juniper tree, another grim fairy tale with a notoriously dark plot, a murdered boy is transformed into a bird who sings his story from the branches of a juniper tree. The tree here is a witness, a sanctuary, and the means through which truth and justice are ultimately restored. Its presence is conscious and crucial to the moral reckoning of the story. Similarly, in many variants of European folklore, a hero lost in the woods might be given crucial directions by a creaking oak or a whispering willow, provided they ask politely. Conversely, a character marked by greed or cruelty might find the branches of the forest tightening to block their path, or hear the trees themselves muttering warnings that fill them with dread. The forest in these stories has a moral compass, and its trees are the enforcers of a natural law that predates human courts and kings. What makes these fairy tale representations so powerful is their didactic purpose. They are ethical instruction manuals disguised as fantasy. For generations of listeners, the message was absorbed on a deep, subconscious level. The natural world is aware. It sees your actions. Approach it with humility, gratitude, and kindness, and you may find a powerful ally. Approach it with arrogance and a desire to dominate, and you will face its formidable resistance. This encoded a practical, everyday ecological ethic for common people, long before the modern environmental movement. It taught that a respectful relationship with the living world was not just a spiritual ideal, but a practical necessity for navigating life's challenges. The enduring power of this motif, from the ancient groves to the pages of a child's storybook, demonstrates a remarkable cultural adaptation. The core belief in arboreal consciousness proved too resilient to be erased by industrialization or rationalism. Instead, it shape-shifted, finding a new and lasting home in the realm of storytelling. It shows that the human need to see ourselves in partnership with nature, to hear a voice in the rustling leaves, is a fundamental part of our psyche. These stories ensure that the whisper of the ancient world trees was never silenced. It was simply repackaged in a new, magical form, ensuring that each new generation would learn to listen. Yet if the gnarled forests of fairy tales offered a path of moral instruction for the common folk, the esoteric tradition of Hermeticism presented a far more intricate and celestial vision of arboreal consciousness, one that mapped the entire universe onto the form of a single sacred tree. Emerging from the philosophical melting pot of Hellenistic Egypt, Hermeticism takes its name from the mythical sage Hermes Trismegistus, a fusion of the Greek god Hermes and the Egyptian god Thoth. Within its cryptic texts, we find not a tree that speaks in rustling leaves or creaking branches, but a tree that speaks in symbols, a cosmic diagram so vast and alive that to understand its structure is to understand the very mind of God. This is the tree of life, known in Hebrew as the Etz Chaim, and it is the ultimate expression of the belief that a tree can be a conscious, intelligent map of all that exists. This was no mere picture in a book. For Hermeticists, the Kabbalists, and later alchemists who adopted this symbol, the tree of life was a living, breathing entity. Its 10 spheres, or sephiroth, connected by 22 paths, were not abstract concepts but living emanations of divine energy, each one a distinct facet of the universal consciousness, from the boundless light of Keter at its crown to the grounded, material presence of Malkuth at its roots. To meditate upon this tree was to engage in a profound dialogue with a sentient structure. A seeker wouldn't just study the attribute of beauty associated with the sphere Tifereth. They would attempt to commune with it, to feel its harmonious, balancing energy flow through them, believing that the tree itself was a responsive conduit for this divine force. Each sephira was seen as having its own voice, its own unique frequency in the great symphony of creation, and by mentally ascending the tree through meditation, the initiate aimed to attune their own consciousness to these celestial vibrations, thereby gaining the wisdom and power inherent in each level. This system represents the ultimate philosophical refinement of the ancient arboreal myths. It takes the intuitive, folkloric sense that a tree is alive and aware and elevates it into a sophisticated framework for understanding the architecture of reality itself. The roots of this cosmic tree dig deep into the underworlds of matter and the subconscious, while its highest branches stretch into the ineffable realms of pure spirit and absolute unity. Every known thing, every mineral, every emotion, every planet, every angel has its place on this immense, living diagram. A practicing Hermeticist walking through a physical forest would therefore see every oak and every willow as a tiny, physical reflection of this greater cosmic tree. The bark patterns, the root structures, the way the branches reached for the sun, all of it was a microcosmic echo of the macrocosm, a signature left by the divine mind on the natural world, waiting to be read by those with the eyes to see. This tradition offers a breathtakingly holistic framework for seeing the universe. It posits that the same consciousness that animates a human being also animates a galaxy, a thought, and a tree, and that all of these are mystically interconnected through the branches and roots of this single, living system. The tree becomes the ultimate metaphor for the interconnectedness of all knowledge and all being. To study astronomy, psychology, botany, or theology was not to study separate subjects, but to simply explore different branches of the same immense conscious tree. This provided a powerful antidote to the feeling of separation and alienation, promising that anyone, through dedicated contemplation of this arboreal map, could find their own place within the cosmos and understand their role in the great, unfolding story of existence. The whispering leaves of Dodona offered specific prophecies, but the symbolic voice of the hermetic tree of life offered nothing less than the secret of everything. But beyond the grand cathedrals and the epic poems, in the quiet corners of the European countryside, the belief in talking trees was not a matter of high philosophy or state religion. It was woven into the very fabric of daily life. This was a practical, hands-on spirituality, a lived experience where the boundary between the human and the natural world was so thin it was almost invisible. In countless villages from the Scottish Highlands to the Carpathian foothills, there stood a specific tree that served as the community's elder, its counselor, and its weather vane. This wasn't a mythical tree from a forgotten age. It was the ancient oak on the village green, the gnarled hawthorn at the crossroads, or the immense linden in the center of town. These trees were treated with the reverence owed to a respected grandparent, for it was believed they possessed a quiet consciousness, an awareness that could guide and protect those who knew how to ask. The ways people communicated with these arboreal elders were as varied as the communities themselves. A common practice across many regions was the act of telling the bees, but a far more widespread tradition was consulting the trees about matters of weather and future events. A farmer, anxious about planting his crops, might study the behavior of the leaves on a specific, known oak. If the leaves showed their silver undersides in a particular way, it was a sure sign of coming rain. But this wasn't seen as a simple meteorological observation. It was a conversation. The tree was consciously offering a warning or giving its blessing. Similarly, the specific way a branch might creak in the wind, or the pattern of shadows it cast at a certain time of day, could be interpreted as an answer to a silently posed question about a potential marriage, a long journey, or the health of a newborn child. The tree's movements were its language, and the entire village shared a common vocabulary to understand it. One of the most beautiful and enduring customs is the practice of tying cloth or ribbons to the branches of these wish trees. This is often mistakenly dismissed as a mere superstition or a quaint tourist attraction, but its roots go much deeper. The act was never just about tying a knot. It was a profound ritual of reciprocity. A person with a troubled heart, an illness, or a deep desire would go to a specific tree known for its power, often a hawthorn, an ash, or a clooty well tree in Scotland and Ireland. They would touch the tree, sometimes introducing themselves and explaining their plight, and then tie a piece of cloth, often one that had been in contact with the afflicted part of the body. This was not an empty gesture. The belief was that the tree, as a conscious and compassionate being, would actively listen to the plea, absorb the illness or the worry into itself, and in return use its ancient strength and connection to the earth to grant healing or aid. The fluttering rags were not litter. They were a testament to hundreds of individual conversations, a physical record of a community's hopes and sorrows, left in the care of a silent, leafy guardian. This everyday animism created a powerful and tangible conservation ethic. You did not harm the village tree because it was quite literally a member of the community. Its well-being was directly tied to the fortune of the people. If the tree was healthy and strong, it was believed the village would prosper. If it was struck by lightning or began to sicken, it was a cause for communal concern and often prompted rituals to appease whatever force had upset it. This was a worldview that fostered not just respect, but a genuine relationship. These customs show us that the myths of arboreal consciousness were never just stories to be told around a fire. They were instructions for living. They were a way of navigating the world that acknowledged a fundamental truth we are only now rediscovering through science, that we are part of a vast, interconnected web of life, and that intelligence is not a monopoly of the human mind. The whispering leaves and the creaking boughs were a constant invitation to listen, to engage, and to remember that we are never truly alone in the world, but are always in the presence of ancient, patient, and knowing beings. Yet for all its cosmic grandeur, the Hermetic Tree of Life finds a startlingly intimate parallel in one of the most foundational stories of the Western world, a narrative where the fate of all humanity hinges on a single, fateful interaction with a tree. In the Abrahamic traditions, most famously in the Book of Genesis, we are presented with the Garden of Eden and its two central arboreal figures, the Tree of Life and the Tree of the Knowledge of Good and Evil. While these trees are not explicitly given voices that speak in human language, their role in the story implies a profound and potent form of consciousness, making them active, willful participants in the drama of creation. They are not passive props in the landscape. They are the very axis upon which the story turns, the divine instruments that test the first humans and set the entire course of human history into motion. The Tree of the Knowledge of Good and Evil is particularly fascinating. God's command to Adam is clear: "You must not eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, for when you eat from it you will certainly die." But the tree itself and the fruit it bears is described as good for food and pleasing to the eye, and also desirable for gaining wisdom. There is an inherent, almost magnetic allure to it, a quality that suggests the tree possesses its own agency, its own conscious power to attract and to test. When the serpent enters the narrative, it doesn't speak to Adam. It speaks to Eve about the tree, amplifying its desirable nature. The tree becomes a silent partner in the temptation, its very presence and appealing fruit acting as a form of communication. In many ancient Jewish and Christian mystical interpretations, this is taken a step further. Some Midrashic commentaries and Kabbalistic texts suggest that the tree did indeed possess a form of consciousness, and that its fruit was not merely a physical object but a vessel of a potent spiritual intelligence. To eat of it was not just to disobey a command. It was to actively engage with a conscious force that would fundamentally alter the consumer's very nature, opening their eyes to moral duality and the burden of choice. This interpretation transforms the tree from a simple test into a divine agent of will, a necessary catalyst for the transition from innocent, childlike existence in the garden to the complex, morally aware state that defines humanity. The tree, in this reading, is a conscious tool in God's plan, the necessary mechanism for granting the gift and the curse of free will. It is the fulcrum of choice and consequence. The act of eating its fruit is the first human act of will against divine instruction, and the tree is the conscious vehicle that makes that choice possible. Its consciousness is not its own, but an extension of the divine will that placed it in the garden for that exact purpose. This places the tree at the absolute center of the human origin story, not as a villain, but as the essential key to becoming truly human. This theme of trees as conscious conduits of divine choice echoes throughout the broader Abrahamic canon. In the Hebrew Bible, the prophet Deborah delivers her judgments and commands the armies of Israel from beneath a palm tree, known as the Palm of Deborah, which is presented as a place of such sacredness and wisdom that it acts as a conduit for her prophetic authority. In the New Testament, Jesus curses a fig tree for being barren, and it withers immediately. While often interpreted as a lesson on faith or a metaphor for spiritual emptiness, the episode also carries an underlying assumption of the tree's responsiveness. It is a being capable of being addressed and of responding to a divine command, even if that response is its own death. These stories, taken together, create a powerful through line. Trees are never just background scenery. They are deeply embedded in the spiritual mechanics of the world, capable of bearing divine fruit, hosting prophetic wisdom, or withering under judgment. They are portrayed as beings that interact with the human and the divine, symbols of the profound and often painful choices that define a moral life. The whispering trees of pagan Europe and the conscious world trees of the Norse find a unique and powerful counterpart in the silent, potent, and world-altering trees of the Edenic garden. Yet if the alchemist sought secrets and the fairy tales offered moral lessons, the poets of the Romantic era turned to the forests for something far more personal and profound, a cure for the soul. As the late 18th century gave way to the 19th, a profound shift was underway. The Industrial Revolution was rapidly transforming the landscape, blotting out green fields with soot-blackened factories and choking the air with coal smoke. For a new generation of artists and writers, this wasn't just progress. It was a spiritual crisis, a violent severing of humanity's ancient bond with the natural world. In response, they launched a movement that was both a fierce critique of their age and a passionate revival of the oldest myths of all. They were the Romantics, and they did not just write about trees. They listened to them, and in their most powerful verses, they gave those trees a voice to speak directly to the human heart. At the forefront of this movement was William Wordsworth, who made the lush Lake District of England his open-air cathedral. For Wordsworth, a tree was never merely a tree. In his seminal poem, Lines Written in Early Spring, he doesn't just observe the natural world, he feels its emotional pulse. He writes, "And 'tis my faith that every flower enjoys the air it breathes, and extends this profound empathy to the grove around him." The twigs on the trees spread out their leaves, and he perceives this not as a biological function, but as an act of conscious enjoyment, a thrill of pleasure. When he hears the birds around him, he imagines their music is a form of pleasure and power. This was a radical act of re-enchantment. Wordsworth was reviving the pre-industrial, almost pagan sense of a universally animate nature, but he was doing it through the lens of deep personal feeling. The rustling of the leaves wasn't just a sound, it was a sigh of contentment. The tree was not an object, it was a feeling subject, a companion in the shared experience of existence. His poetry was an urgent plea to his readers to slow down, to step away from the clamor of the mills and the crowded city streets, and to remember how to feel this connection again. His close friend and collaborator, Samuel Taylor Coleridge, explored a darker, more sublime side of this arboreal consciousness. While Wordsworth found joy in nature, Coleridge was drawn to its awe-inspiring, sometimes terrifying power. In his haunting poem, Christabel, the forest is no peaceful haven but a sentient, Gothic realm filled with portent. He describes an old oak tree, its branches stripped bare by a storm, and personifies it with a chilling awareness. The one red leaf, the last of its clan, that dances as often as dance it can, clinging to the branch as if holding on to life itself. Later, the poem speaks of the forest as a whole, noting how the night is chill, the forest bare, is it the wind that moans forlorn. This is not a simple metaphor. Coleridge is blurring the line between the natural environment and the psychological state of his characters. The moaning wind is the forest itself expressing a deep, forlorn sorrow, reflecting and amplifying the tension and dread within the narrative. The trees become conscious witnesses to the unfolding tragedy. Their very sounds are commentary on the action, much like the chorus in a Greek play. For Coleridge, the natural world was a vast, emotional mirror, and its trees were the most eloquent reflectors of the human soul's deepest turmoils. This literary movement was far more than an aesthetic preference. It was a form of quiet activism. The Romantics were consciously using the ancient tool of personification as a political and ecological weapon. By giving voice to the trees, by making them sigh, rejoice, and lament, they were directly challenging the emerging mechanistic worldview of the industrial age, the philosophy that saw nature as nothing more than a clockwork universe of dead matter. a collection of resources to be mined, harvested, and exploited without conscience. When Percy Bysshe Shelley wrote of the wind as a wild spirit moving through the forest, or when John Keats addressed a nightingale singing from a beech tree, they were making a defiant statement: the world is alive. It has intrinsic value beyond its utility to humans. It has a voice, and that voice deserves to be heard. Their poetry was a call to develop what we would now call ecological empathy, to feel a sense of kinship and responsibility for the non-human world. This powerful poetic legacy did not fade with the end of the Romantic period. It planted a seed that would grow and intertwine with the very roots of the modern environmental movement. The idea that a forest has a right to exist for its own sake, that it possesses a vitality and a voice that we must consider, can be traced directly back to the verses of Wordsworth and Coleridge. Their work taught us to see the natural world not as a separate realm to be conquered, but as a community to which we belong. They remind us that in the whispering leaves and the sighing branches, we might just find a wisdom we have been desperately searching for, a wisdom that has been echoing through the forest since the very beginning of time. Yet even as the Romantics wrote their verses, a quieter, more personal revival was already taking root in the shadows of the industrialized world, a movement that would carry the torch of arboreal consciousness directly into the 21st century. This is the world of modern paganism, a diverse tapestry of nature-based spiritualities that have consciously and deliberately reclaimed the ancient belief in tree spirits, not as folklore, but as a living, breathing reality. For a contemporary druid walking through a forest, a Wiccan priestess celebrating the turning of the seasons, or an eclectic pagan tending a backyard garden, the trees are not symbolic reminders of a lost past. They are present tense companions, conscious entities known as dryads, tree spirits, or simply the standing people, a term that beautifully captures their dignified, watchful presence. In the world, this is not a hobby or a fantasy game. It is a spiritual practice that seeks to repair the broken relationship between humanity and the natural world by reviving the oldest conversation of all. The methods of this communion are as varied as the practitioners themselves, but they all share a common thread of deep, respectful engagement. Many modern pagans practice a form of tree meditation, a simple yet profound act of sitting quietly at the base of a chosen tree, slowing one's breath and attempting to quiet the chatter of the modern mind. This isn't about demanding answers or extracting wisdom. It's about opening a channel, creating a silent space where a different kind of communication can occur. The goal is to listen, not with the ears but with the whole being, to feel the immense, slow patience of the oak, the quick, flexible energy of the willow, or the protective, cleansing aura of the birch. Practitioners often report receiving insights not as words but as sudden feelings of peace, flashes of intuitive understanding, or a deep sense of being energetically grounded and supported. Others engage in more formal rituals, leaving offerings of clean water, shiny crystals, or a song of gratitude at the base of a tree, acts of reciprocity that acknowledge the tree's giving of oxygen, shade, and beauty. They might carefully observe the specific way the wind moves through a particular tree's branches on a given day, interpreting these movements as signs or omens relevant to their current life path, continuing the exact same tradition of arboreal divination practiced at Dodona thousands of years earlier. This revival is deeply intentional, a direct response to the pervasive feelings of alienation and anxiety generated by our modern, hyper-connected yet nature-disconnected lives. In the face of overwhelming ecological crisis, the relentless news of climate change, deforestation, and species extinction, these practices offer a way to move beyond grief and paralysis into a state of active, sacred relationship. By personally relating to a tree as a conscious being, its well-being becomes directly tied to one's own. The act of defending a local forest from development transforms from a political stance into a personal duty to protect a community of non-human persons. This spiritual framework provides a powerful motivation for environmental activism, grounding it in love and reverence rather than just guilt or fear. It is a way of re-enchanting the world, of peeling back the sterile, concrete surface of modern life to reveal the shimmering, sentient landscape that our ancestors knew, a landscape that has been there all along, waiting for us to remember how to see it. What makes this modern pagan revival so significant is its demonstration of the incredible endurance and adaptability of these ancient myths. The core idea that trees are conscious has survived centuries of religious persecution, scientific materialism, and industrial exploitation. It was not erased, it simply went underground, carried in folk tales, fairy stories, and the secret longings of the human heart, until the cultural conditions were right for it to blossom once more. This isn't a rejection of science. Many pagans are deeply knowledgeable about ecology and biology. Instead, it represents a fusion, a way of marrying the empirical understanding of how a tree functions with the spiritual experience of who a tree is. It proves that the need to belong to a living, speaking world is a fundamental human drive, one that will always find a way to express itself. By choosing to kneel at the roots of an ancient yew and offer a prayer, a modern person is not engaging in superstition. They are plugging back into a network of meaning that is thousands of years old, adding their own voice to a conversation that has never truly ceased, only been forgotten by some. They are answering a call that has been whispering on the wind since the beginning of time. For centuries, the idea that trees could speak was confined to the realm of myth and poetry, a beautiful metaphor from a less enlightened age. But what if our ancestors weren't speaking figuratively? What if they were perceiving a profound truth about the natural world that we are only now, with our advanced instruments and experiments, beginning to measure and understand? The most stunning development in our story is not the persistence of these ancient myths, but the fact that modern science is now uncovering a reality that seems to validate their deepest intuition. We have moved from the sacred groves and fairy tales into the peer-reviewed journal, and the findings are nothing short of revolutionary. At the heart of this discovery is a breathtaking underground network, a biological internet that has been thriving beneath our feet for millions of years. Scientists have discovered that the roots of trees are interwoven with incredibly fine, filamentous structures of fungi, forming a symbiotic relationship known as a mycorrhizal network. This isn't just a simple partnership. It's a sophisticated communications grid, so intricate and efficient that researcher Suzanne Simard famously nicknamed it the Wood Wide Web. Through this fungal network, trees do something astonishing. They communicate. A birch tree being attacked by insects can send chemical warning signals through the fungal threads to a nearby pine tree. Receiving this signal, the pine tree then preemptively begins producing defensive compounds to protect itself before the insects even arrive. This is not a passive reaction. It's a conscious act of relay and reception, a form of arboreal conversation. But the conversation isn't limited to warnings. This hidden network also facilitates a remarkable economy of sharing and mutual support. Mother trees, the large, old central hubs of a forest, use this fungal web to nurture their young. Scientific studies using radioactive carbon isotopes have shown that these elder trees can identify their own seedling offspring and then divert precious resources, sugars, nutrients, and water through the network to give them a better chance at survival. A struggling seedling not connected to this network will perish, while one that is linked into the community thrives. This challenges the very foundation of how we've viewed the natural world, which has long been framed by Darwinian competition. Instead, the forest operates more like a cooperative society, an interdependent community where individual survival is inextricably linked to the health of the collective. The trees are not solitary competitors fighting for sunlight. They are social beings engaged in a constant, silent dialogue of support. the evidence for plant intelligence continues to mount in fascinating ways. The field of plant neurobiology, though its name is controversial, has made incredible strides in demonstrating that plants possess capabilities we once thought were exclusive to animals. They can learn from experience and form memories. The classic example is the Mimosa pudica, the touch-me-not plant, which famously folds its leaves when disturbed. In experiments, scientists dropped the plant a short distance repeatedly. Initially, it would curl up each time, but after several drops, it learned that the fall wasn't actually dangerous and stopped reacting, conserving its energy. Even more remarkably, the plant retained this memory for weeks. This is a clear, measurable form of learning. Furthermore, trees have demonstrated the ability to process information from their environment through complex electrical and chemical signaling that moves through their vascular systems, a process some scientists have cautiously compared to an animal's nervous system. They can distinguish between different types of threats, allocate resources with precision, and adapt their growth patterns based on past events. This isn't consciousness as we know it in humans, but it is a form of awareness and responsiveness that forces us to expand our definition of intelligence and sentience. This scientific revolution does not diminish the ancient myths, it illuminates them. It suggests that the poets, the mystics, and the village elders who spoke of talking trees were not merely projecting human qualities onto silent plants. They were perceiving on an intuitive level the vibrant, dynamic, and interconnected reality of the forest. They sensed the communication they could not see. When an ancient Greek listened to the rustling leaves of the Oracle oak at Dodona, they were interpreting the audible manifestation of a tree deeply connected to its environment, reacting to the wind, the sun, and the subtle chemical messages on the air. When a Slavic peasant believed the Leshy made the forest rearrange itself, they were giving a face to the observable reality that a forest is a single, responsive organism. Science has given us the microscope to see the mycelial threads, but the mythmakers had the wisdom to understand the connection they represented. This creates a powerful and beautiful dialogue across time, where our oldest stories and our newest discoveries are converging on the same profound truth: the forest is a community. It is aware, it is communicative, and we are only just beginning to learn its language, a language our ancestors seem to understand in their bones. This convergence invites not a dismissal of the old ways, but a humble reconciliation, urging us to finally listen to the whispers in the leaves with the respectful attention they have always deserved. This profound cultural legacy, woven from centuries of whispered myths and sacred groves, did not vanish with the arrival of the modern age. Instead, it took root in the very heart of our storytelling, shaping some of the most beloved narratives of the 20th century. Perhaps no modern author was more deeply influenced by these ancient themes than J.R.R. Tolkien, a scholar of Anglo-Saxon and Norse mythology who breathed life into the most iconic talking trees in modern literature, the Ents of Middle-earth. In the Ents, Tolkien did not simply create a fantasy creature, he resurrected the collective spirit of the European forest. These ancient, slow-speaking shepherds of the trees are the direct literary descendants of the guardian trees of Celtic and Germanic lore, the prophetic oaks of Dodona, and the vengeful spirits of Slavic forests. Their deliberate, ponderous speech echoes the slow, creaking language our ancestors attributed to ancient oaks. Their deep sorrow and rising fury at the wanton destruction of their forests by the wizard Saruman is a powerful allegory for the ecological grief and rage that these old myths understood intuitively. Tolkien wasn't just writing a story, he was channeling a millennia-old cultural memory, giving voice to the very same arboreal consciousness that once guided kings and comforted villagers, reminding an industrializing world that the forest has a will of its own, and that to harm it is to awaken a wrath that moves with the patient, unstoppable force of a glacier. This literary thread extends far beyond the borders of Middle-earth, weaving its way through the tapestry of global culture. C.S. Lewis populated the Narnian woods with talking trees that dance with fauns, continuing the tradition of the animate, participating forest. In Japan, the revered Studio Ghibli films of Hayao Miyazaki are filled with majestic, conscious tree spirits, from the great forest spirit in Princess Mononoke to the adorable, plant-like Kodama, whose presence signifies a healthy, ancient forest. These are not random inventions. They are the modern cinematic expression of Japan's own deep-rooted Shinto belief in kami, the spirits that inhabit natural phenomena, including ancient trees. Even in the realm of fantasy gaming, from the Ents of World of Warcraft to the Sylvari of Guild Wars, we see a persistent yearning to interact with a natural world that can talk back, to be part of a story where the environment is not a backdrop but a character. This enduring popularity proves that the archetype of the conscious tree is not a relic but a living, evolving part of our collective imagination, a testament to a deep-seated human need to see ourselves in relationship with a world that is alive and aware. But the legacy of these myths is far more than entertainment. It has provided the emotional and philosophical foundation for the modern environmental movement. The pioneering work of conservationists like John Muir, who famously wrote of the Sierra forests as temples and spoke of trees as fellow beings, is steeped in the same reverent language used to describe sacred groves. When Julia Butterfly Hill lived in 1,000-year-old California redwood she named Luna for 2 years to protect it from loggers, she was not just an activist, she was a modern-day dryad, engaging in a profound act of personal sacrifice to defend a being she saw as conscious and worthy of rights. This direct line from myth to activism demonstrates how these ancient stories provide a blueprint for a new, yet ancient, ecological ethic. They challenge the dominant worldview of nature as a commodity and offer a different model, nature as kin, as community, as a subject rather than an object. This shift in perception from resource to relationship is the most powerful gift these old myths bequeath to us. In an age of escalating climate crisis and mass extinction, this legacy is not a quaint curiosity, it is an urgent necessity. Revisiting these stories of talking trees is not an escape from reality, but a way to access a deeper reality, one that our ancestors understood and that we have tragically forgotten. These myths offer more than just inspiration. They offer a roadmap for sustainable living based on reciprocity, respect, and listening. They teach us that sustainability is not a technical problem to be solved with better engineering alone, but a relational one, rooted in whether we see the world around us as a collection of things to be used or a community of beings to be engaged with. The challenge they lay before us is profound. It is to quiet the noise of our modern lives and remember how to listen, not with our ears, but with our hearts. It is to walk into a forest and feel not that we are in a museum of plants, but that we are in the presence of persons. It is to recognize that the voices our ancestors heard in the rustling leaves were not a primitive fantasy, but a sophisticated understanding of a truth we are only now, through science, beginning to confirm, that the forest is a network, a community, a conversation. The legacy of arboreal consciousness is an invitation to rejoin that conversation, to find our place within the living, speaking world once more, and to ensure that the ancient whispers of the forests are not just stories from our past, but guides for our future. From the oracular oaks of Greece to the wise Bodhi tree, these myths of arboreal consciousness are far more than just charming stories from a bygone era. They represent a profound and universal human longing to connect with nature's wisdom, a deep-seated intuition that the world around us is not a collection of inert objects but a community of conscious beings. Our ancestors did not see trees as passive resources. They saw them as active, sentient partners in the great journey of life, as teachers, guardians, and oracles holding secrets we have since forgotten in our rush toward modernity. This worldview was not one of naive superstition, but of sophisticated ecological understanding, recognizing that human survival and flourishing were inextricably linked to the health and happiness of the natural world. These narratives from every corner of the globe are a powerful testament to a time when humanity listened to the wind in the leaves and understood it as a language, when the forest was a cathedral and every tree a priest offering sermons in silence. The lessons embedded within these ancient stories are not relics. They are urgently needed wisdom for our present moment. At their core, these myths teach us about respect, the understanding that we are not the masters of nature but its humble students and grateful beneficiaries. They teach us about interdependence, illustrating through metaphor and allegory what science now confirms through the study of mycorrhizal networks, that the forest is a collaborative community where the well-being of the individual is tied to the health of the whole. And perhaps most importantly, they teach us about the sacredness of the natural world, the idea that the earth is not merely real estate to be developed but a living, breathing entity worthy of our reverence and care. In an age of escalating climate crisis, mass extinction, and profound environmental disconnect, these are not optional philosophical concepts. They are essential guiding principles for building a sustainable future. They offer a blueprint for a relationship with the earth that is based not on domination and extraction, but on reciprocity and reverence. Re-engaging with these myths does not mean we must literally believe that every tree has a face or a voice that speaks in human words. Instead, it invites us to perform a profound act of re-enchantment, to look at the world with fresh eyes and see the vitality and intelligence that animates it. It encourages us to shift our perception from seeing nature as a thing to be used to a presence to be engaged with. This shift in perspective is the first and most crucial step toward meaningful change. When we begin to see a forest not as a warehouse of timber but as a community of ancient beings, when we view a single tree not as an ornament but as an elder holding centuries of memory, our actions toward them naturally change. Conservation becomes an act of respect for a fellow being, not just a policy for managing resources. Sustainability becomes a moral imperative born of relationship, not just an economic strategy. So let these ancient voices, carried on the wind through thousands of years of storytelling, encourage you to listen to the trees around you. The next time you walk through a park or stand in your backyard, pause for a moment. Place your hand on the rough bark of an old tree, look up into its canopy and watch the way the light filters through its leaves. Listen to the sound it makes in the wind. Perhaps you won't hear words as our ancestors claimed to, but you might feel a sense of peace, a connection to something larger than yourself, a whisper of an ancient wisdom that reminds you that you too are part of this living, breathing world. The trees have been here long before us, and they hold the secrets of resilience, patience, and interconnectedness. They have been trying to tell us their secrets all along. It is time we remember how to